Okay. Um, First of all, before anything else, uh, thank you, Debbie, for sponsoring tonight. Extremely appropriate. The learning should be in the merit of those in Israel in need of comfort, refuah, or release from captivity, as well as all in the IDF or otherwise in harm's way. May Hashem bring a speedy end to the situation. Amen. And
Right.
thank you for certainly starting us off in the right foot, Debbie. Thank you. Okay, it's nice to see everybody. Um, Beginning Sefer Malachim. Beginning Sefer Malachim. So, um, basically, for those of you who weren't with us the last time we met, uh, there was a terrible calamity befalling Klal Yisrael, and David HaMelech was put in a situation to choose what he wanted. Did he want plague? Did he want to flee before the enemy? Did he want famine? And he chose, if I remember correctly, it was 3 days of plague, if I'm not mistaken. And that's what happened. And now we're really at the end of David's monarchy. Really, really at the end of David's monarchy. So here we are, Malachim Aleph, beginning of Malachim Aleph, chapter 1, verse 1. Va'melech David Zakein. And let me just say, I know we're recording this for Linda. Linda, we miss you, and we hope you're doing okay, you and Ed. And everybody in Israel should be well. And we look forward to seeing you back and well at the right time. And everybody in your family should be well. Okay. Va'melech David Zakein B'Bayamim. Wow, you could tell it's been a while since I did this. I forgot to mute everybody. No offense to anybody, but just this cuts down a background sound. Va'melech David Zakein. So the king David had become old. Ba'Bayamim. He had come on in days. Vayichasuhu B'Abgodim. The people covered him with clothing. Below Yichamlo. And it was not warm for him. Okay, so first of all, just to set the stage, the Radak says he is now 70 years old. We've come across this issue before. There are different opinions as to the length of David's monarchy, et cetera, all kinds of things. But the Radak's perspective is that David HaMelech is 70 years old at this juncture. He became king when he was 30 years old, and he ruled for 40 years. A lot of times people ask questions like the timeline. That is the timeline according to the Radak. The Radak says, so that's what we mean when we say he was Zakein. Now, Ba'Bayamim is an additional statement to being Zakein. Ba'Bayamim means he had come on in days, and the Radak says that what's meant by that is he was weak. Now, the Radak says one could argue that a 70-year-old shouldn't be considered so elderly and weak, et cetera, et cetera. But he says, David HaMelech had a physically taxing life and all of his involvement with wars and the like. So by this point, for all of his physical distress and duress, he, by the end of his life, though he was, not terribly old, he was very, very tired and weak. Okay. Now, the fact that we say at the end of the pasuk that they covered him with clothing, right? Someone points out that Moshe Rabbeinu was not weak at 120. It's a great schus that Moshe Rabbeinu had. Yeah, thank you. We say it wasn't warm for him. So the Radak says this is another aspect of describing his old age. In other words, that he couldn't be warm. There wasn't a way to warm him. Now, there's a very famous medrash. I'm sure many of you have heard of this medrash before. I'm sure we've referenced it numerous times over the months, that we know that there was a time where David could have killed Shaul had he desired to do so. And instead of killing Shaul, he cut the corner of Shaul's cloak. And the fact that he cut the corner of Shaul's cloak was a way of showing Shaul, hey, I could have gotten you. But, the Medrash says that was disrespectful to clothing. And the Medrash says that the reason why David couldn't be warmed by the clothing is if a person doesn't treat clothing with respect, then the day will come where clothing won't serve him. And that's this famous idea. There's another medrash the reason why David was cold was because this was something from the end of Shmuel Beis that we referenced it a moment ago. I don't think I mentioned this part of the story, that David saw an angel with a sword outstretched towards Yerushalayim. And that was a very frightening vision for him. And that's this thing that he now understood, that something terrible was going to happen. And so that shocked him so that considered to like cool him. And he never was able to be warm again. Okay. Now, maybe I'll hold off on the Malvin until we've read a few more psukim. Verse 2. Vayomru lo avodav. David's servants said to David, so there's a problem. The king is old and weak and he can't find warmth. So his servants said to him, Yivakshu ladoni amelech na'arav sulah. Let them ask for my master the king a virgin young lady, v'amda lifnei amelech, and she should stand before the king, usihilo sochenes, and she should be for him as a warmer. V'shachva v'chekecha, and she will lie in your lap. V'cham ladoni hamelech, and it will be provide warmth to my master, the king. Okay, this is obviously a little bit of a surprising issue here. So, just a few comments over here. So the Radak says that I can't speak to this, but the Radak says there was an idea that a virgin had more natural warmth. Verse 2, chapter 1, verse 2, at the beginning of Malach. A virgin had more natural warmth than a woman who had relations before. That's what the Radak says. The Ralbag says that David would be warmed by an arousal of desire. That this is the idea. That, in other words, the straightforward meaning of the verse is that this young lady lying in David's lap will be some kind of physical warmth for him. The Ralbag says it will arouse some sort form of desire for him, and that will generate an inner warmth. That's what the Ralbag says. Now the Malbim is a different shot. The Malbim says that they actually they wanted him to be aroused by a woman because they felt that he would gain inner heat through that, but they didn't want him to actually have relations with anybody because he was weak to begin with, and that wasn't going to be good for him. So therefore, the idea was that there would be a woman who was a psula who should stay a psula. So that's what the Malbim says. Okay. Fine. Verse 3. They found a uniquely beautiful woman. They found Avishag, and they brought her to the king. Verse 4, Vahanara Yafa Ad Ma'od. She was a uniquely beautiful person. Vatihila Melech Sochenes Vat Sharseyu. And she was to him, she provided warmth for him and she served him. Vamelech Lo Yida'a. And the king did not have relations with her. Okay. Let's move on in this story. Verse 5. Vadoniyaven Chagis misnasei lemor ani emloch. Adoniyah, the son of Chagis, who was the son of David. Chagis is his mother. David is his father. He elevated himself, raised himself up to say, I want to rule. Vayaslo rechev ufarashim. He made for himself a chariot and riders. Vachamishim ish ratzim lefanav. And 50 people running before him. Okay. Let's read one more pasuk and then we'll explain a little bit. Verse 6. His father never distressed him, saying to him, Madua kacha asisa, why did you do such and such? V'gamu tov toar ma'od, he was of a very fine physical appearance. V'yoso yolda acharei Avshalom, and his mother bore him after Avshalom was born. Okay. Now, the Radak says that verse 6 is the reason why he felt he could rebel against David HaMelech, felt he could take the kingdom for himself. One is his father never told him no. And if one spoils the child, then who knows what the future will bring. And the other is he was a uniquely handsome person. So, he kind of spent his life being told how special he was. And his father didn't set him straight ever. So he wasn't used to not getting what he wanted. He wanted to be the king. Now, there's an interesting question over here. Did Adoniyahu know that Shlomo was supposed to be the king? We've seen that Nasan HaNavi told David that his son, and it was clearly a reference to Shlomo, will rule after him. Did Adoniyahu know that, or did he not know that? So the Radak says, of course he knew that. Of course he knew Shlomo was supposed to be king. If he knew Shlomo was supposed to be king, why would he do this whole thing of presenting himself as the king in waiting? So the Radak says, the pasuk told us, because his father never said no to him. He was never used to accepting something that he didn't want. So he wanted to be king, so he's going to take the kingdom. That's what the Radak says. The Ralbag says that he surmised that the reason why his father never said no to him is because he was grooming him for the monarchy. In other words, I know why my father never said no to me. It's because I'm special. What does it mean to be special in the king's family? What it means to be special in the king's family is you're the successor. So according to the Ralbag, the fact that his father always treated him that way actually caused an error for him. Rashi, by the way, says that the relevance of saying he was born after Avshalom is that he was raised in the same way as Avshalom. And that, Elaine, definitely fits into what you just raised, the point that you just raised, that because it's not a coincidence that Avshalom tried to get something and didn't succeed, and now Adoniyahu is going to try to get the same thing, because they were both raised with this sense of entitlement, and the fact that they both had the sense of entitlement causes this very negative conduct. I also want to point out, the Radak explains this, that Adoniyahu is the fourth child of David. The Radak surmises that he is the oldest living child of David at this point. And therefore, he feels that he's supposed to be the king. So the picture that we have right now is Adoniyahu decides he wants to be the king, so he's going to take it. Nancy?
Yes, Rabbi. But and in the same vein of what Elaine is saying, but didn't he notice that it didn't end well for his brother? I mean, it's something to be brought up the same way, but it didn't end well for Avshalom.
Well, we could say two things. One thing we could say is David's in a very different physical state now than he used to be. So maybe it didn't end well for Avshalom because his timing was off. Mm-hmm. Now this is a good time. Uh-huh. That's one possibility. And I think the other possibility, which might be even more indicative, is generally speaking, haughty people have a very interesting take on what is and isn't their ability and what is and isn't their right. And it's very unfortunate if things didn't work out for Avshalom, but I bet I'm even better than him.
That's true. That is true.
But even without that, there's an objective reason to assume if it didn't work well before, it still might work well now.
True. That's true. Also, he's the oldest living surviving son. And like you say, and the king is not in good shape right now.
Right.
Yeah, he might have done an evaluation, yeah, even though his brother didn't succeed. Okay.
Right. His brother had the right idea, but the wrong timing.
Right, exactly. Timing is everything.
Timing is everything. Now, I want to pose, thank you, Nancy. I want to pose a general question just to try to understand. You know, I'm pretty confident we'd be okay in our story if the story began with saying David was old and Adoniah said he wanted to be the king. And this whole prelude of David with the young lady, really, I'm sure many of you are asking yourselves, why is this important? And why is this important here? And this is how we start the whole Sefer. So the Malbim has a very, very interesting shot, and it really very much fits into Nancy's last remark. The Malbim says that Adoniyahu did not think of himself as rebelling against David. And the reason why he did not think of himself as rebelling against David is David is not even acting as the king anymore. David's bedridden. David's so, so old and out of it that they have to make a whole strategy for how to get him warm. He's not, there's someone else running the show right now. It's not David. So in a sense, the Malbim says Adoniah thinks of it as he's not rebelling against David. This will be an interesting response to Nancy's question. He's not rebelling against David. He is merely jumping in to the void because he is preempting anybody else. That's how the Malbim explains it. And now the Malbim even has a pshat what this has to do with the whole thing about the young lady. If you're going to rebel against the king, you have to assume the king is going to find out real fast, which is, by the way, more or less what happened with Avshalom. Says the Malbim, Adoniyahu was taking advantage of the fact not only that David was old and maybe, you think of it as not even rebelling against David, maybe it's just seizing, occupying the void. But there's actually another point the Malbim says, and that is this woman was with David on a regular basis. It wasn't exactly a dignified picture to have his advisors and counselors walking into a room where there's some young lady lying on his lap. And you can imagine his wives are not going to be in the mix either at this point. Which means David is totally isolated from the people who would explain to him that something is going on, who would inform him that something is going on. So he's in his bed, isolated. So Adoniah says, this is the time to strike.
Rabbi, Elaine has a good question.
Trying to catch up to my notes, if you don't mind giving me.
Sure.
One more thing the Malbim says. The Malbim suggests another idea as to why, or a related idea to why Adoniah at this point is rising up and saying he wants to be king. At this point, he wants to be king. And he says maybe Adoniah was interested in this woman because she was such a remarkable. Basically, they found the most beautiful young lady in the land. That's basically what happened. That's the feeling. So again, if you spend your life that nobody tells you no, you begin to be very interested in your desires. Okay, Nancy?
Oh, well, the truth is Elaine asked the question and I guess you didn't notice it. Why didn't anybody ask the Navi what the proper procedure is or the proper,
Right. Right. And thank you, Nancy.
And
And
no,
thank you.
it's really Elaine.
Because
I have a second thought as well, but go ahead.
What did you say?
I said it was Elaine Rubin.
Right. I appreciate. Thank you, Nancy, and thank you, Elaine.
Okay.
Okay. So in a sense, first of all, I just want to point out this will be the first father-son succession of monarchy for the Jewish people. It's just worth noting, which means, in a sense, there wasn't a precedent for the procedure. It's just worth noting. Statement number one. Statement number two, there's a machlokas among the commentators. Did Adoniyahu know that he was subverting the plan the Navi had said? Or at least the plan that David had laid out? I don't know if you necessarily have to say that he knew it was a prophecy. So if you say that he knew he was subverting a plan, we know I didn't ask the Navi, because he was looking for the right answer. And the right answer is, I want to be king. Right? We all know people and situations that when they know what they want, they're only going to talk to people who'll get them what they want. That seems to be what's going on over here, if everyone is with me.
Right.
It's a little bit more difficult if you say that he honestly could have thought he was supposed to be the king, but maybe it's not so far off either. If he honestly could have thought he was supposed to be the king, my father essentially told me I was supposed to be the king because he never told me no. What does that tell you? Nancy, do you want to say something?
Yes, I had another thought. People may or may, I'm wondering if they knew or not whether he was actually sleeping with the young woman in a sexual way, and were they concerned that he would produce another heir and there would be, maybe in his old age would, say, okay, I'm giving the kingship to the newest baby, or something strange like that. It's court intrigue,
Yeah, I hear you. It seems to be that it was very clear that she was being brought in because she was a psula. And I guess it was something that was done at the time, sometimes.
Right. Well, you didn't have heating units, but it was, but was she Jewish or was not Jewish?
I have no reason to believe she wasn't Jewish. But by the way, he didn't have intercourse with her.
No, I know, but I don't know if that was public knowledge or not.
Yeah. No, Elaine. Bathsheba was a wife of David, who was the mother of Shlomo Melech, who's going to be coming into the story soon. This is a later thing. Okay. Verse 7. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry to hear. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Verse 7. Vayud varav im Yoav ben Sruya v'im Evyasar Kohen. His words were with Yoav the son of Tzruya and with Evyasar the Kohen, Vayazru Acharei Adoniyahu. And they followed after Adoniyahu. Thank you. And they followed after Adoniyahu. Okay, so Yoav is the general. Okay, Yoav is the sitting general of the Jewish people, chief of staff, and Evyasar was the deposed Kohen Gadol. Evyasar has been on the outs as the Kohen Gadol ever since the Urim V'Tumim did not work for him. Everybody with me? Okay. Now, one doesn't have to be too creative to understand why Evyasar would be interested in someone else's monarchy, because David had deposed him. But why would Yoav be interested in someone else's monarchy? So the Radak says that Yoav knew that he was on David's bad list. The Radak says that Yoav knew that he was on David's bad list. How did Yoav know that he was on David's bad list? Because Yoav had killed a number of people. Right? We've learned it together. Yoav killed Avner, Shalom, Amasa. Right? So now the obvious question is, and this is something that we've grappled with, if Yoav is on David's bad list, which he is on David's bad list, Yoav's correct that he's on David's bad list. If Yoav is on David's bad list, why would he not have been deposed by David? How could he be the sitting chief of staff of David's army if he's on David's bad list? And Yoav intuited that because he was David's key general and he had successfully won various wars for David, David didn't want to depose him. Okay. But Yoav also intuited that David would instruct his successor to do to Yoav what wasn't comfortable for David to do to Yoav. Of course, ends up being exactly correct. Can't blame Yoav. You can't say Yoav didn't understand his political situations. So it made sense for Yoav to be involved with a new successor. Make sense to everybody?
Yes.
Yoav's personal best interest. Now, the Ralbag says that Yoav saw, Adoniyahu saw that Yoav had brought David much military success. So Adoniyahu just intuits that Yoav will be a good figure to bring him success. Make sense? Okay. Now, the Ralbag thinks along similar lines, that even though David had deposed Evyasar as the Kohen Gadol, the bottom line is that David had been close with Evyasar when David fled from Shaul, and therefore Adoniyahu thought that Evyasar's presence would be very helpful for him. Okay, everyone doing well? Okay. Okay. And I just want to see one more thing, which is at the very end of verse 7, it says that they, Yoav and Evyasar, helped after Adoniyahu. They helped after Adoniyahu. What does that mean, that they helped after Adoniyahu? That they lobbied various people from the tribe of Yehuda, which of course was David's tribe, and various people from the general royal party, that they should be interested in the coming monarchy of Adoniyahu. So Adoniyahu has targeted two high-ranking officials in David's government, David's kingdom, to come to his side, and these people are canvassing and bringing up a large group of people. All right, everybody?
Mhm.
Okay. Verse 8. V'tzadok hakohen uvnoyo ben Yehoyada v'nasan hanavi v'shimi v'reyi v'giborim asher David lo hayu im Adoniyo. We now list off a number of people who didn't follow Adoniyo. Sadok was the real Kohen Gadol. V'nayo ben Yehoyada was a prominent aide of David's. We've seen reference to them numerous times over our months. Nasan, the primary Navi of the time, Shimi and Rei, and a general group of great people that were associated with David did not follow with Adoniyahu. And the Malbim explains that even though Adoniyahu was not presenting himself as rebelling against David, rather filling the void, even though that was the case, they understood that the will of David was that Shlomo would be the next king. So they saw this insertion by Adoniyahu of himself as a rebellion against David. All right, everybody?
Mhm.
Verse 9. Vayizbach Adoniyahu tzon v'akarim ri im even hazochelas asher eitzel ein rogel. Adoniyahu went and brought various animals, slaughtered them in this public place. Vayikras kol achav bnei hamelech, and he called all the other members of the royal family. Ulechol anshe Yehuda, he called all of the people of the tribe of Yehuda, Avdei HaMelech, that were the servants of the king. So Adoniyahu made a major event, presumably celebrating his imminent installation as the king of Israel. Verse 10, V'yas nasan hanavi uvnayahu v'es hagiborim v'yas Shlomo achiv lo kara. So he called all kinds of people. He invited all kinds of people. But somehow, Nasan the prophet and B'nayahu and the other prominent people associated with David didn't make the invitation list. Because Adoniyahu knew the score. And Adoniyahu knew that they wouldn't go with him. The Malbim has a very interesting point. If you look in verse 9, if you look at the Hebrew of verse 9, in the middle part of the pasuk it says, Vayikra es kol achav, and he called all of his brothers. The Malbim says that sometimes it says in the pasuk Vayikra es, and sometimes it says in the pasuk Vayikra le. Vayikra is to call like es is like with a person, and Vayikra le is to call to a person. And that is a very significant difference. And the difference is that if you're calling es, the Malbim says, that's like inviting someone to be a confidant. That's like inviting someone, I want to know your thoughts. I want to know your impressions. So in verse 9, when he's calling all these people, he's calling all these people to honor them. Because we all know the greatest way to bring people into your fold is to treat them like they're big stuff. They're VIPs. In verse 10, when we talk about the people that he didn't call, it doesn't say S. In other words, not only did he not send them a VIP pass, he didn't even let them know about it. Okay. Elaine's question. I'm not sure this means a sacrifice as in a korban. I think this is more just a general party that he's making. I think so. Believe so. Okay, I think. Thank you. Verse 11. So, I mean, we basically have an impending rebellion. And similar to Avshalom, by the way, he's not even acting like he's rebelling. He's just sort of like acting like it's a fait accompli. And by the way, if you're a relatively high-ranking person, Kleistro, maybe not the top tier, but a relatively high-ranking person, I mean, Yoav's a good person. If Yas is a good person, they're in the know. It must be that they're supposed that Adoniyahu is supposed to be the king. I don't know why Benayo Ben Yoyada wasn't there. It's not my problem. I don't know. Maybe he had, maybe he had to go out of town for something. I don't know. Verse 11. Vayomer Nasan el Basheva Aim Shlomo Lemor. And Nasan said to Basheva, the mother of Shlomo, Hello Shamata, behold, you've heard. Ki molach Adoniyahu ben Chagis. Have you heard that Adoniyahu has declared himself the king? Va'adonenu David lo yada. And our master David doesn't even know about this. Shlomo Basheva, the mother of Shlomo, the wife of David, has been told that her son is going to be the king. He's going to be the next king. He's very young. He's 12 years old. So Nasan comes into Bathsheba. He's not going to talk to Shlomo about it. Nasan comes into Bathsheba and says, are you aware that there's like a major political party going on? And David doesn't seem to know anything about it. By the way, the Malbim just points out, if you look in verse 11, so Nasan says, have you heard that Adoniyahu has ruled? Malach, he has ruled. What's meant by that? So the Malbim explains that what's meant by that is he's like already taken over. This is not like I want to tell you about a plan that's being hatched. This is the train. It feels like the train has already left the station. So there's no time to waste. Now, another point the Malbim makes over here is that Nasan is saying to Bathsheba, don't give up. There's still hope. Why is there still hope? Because David doesn't know about it. As we mentioned already, David is really in isolation. He doesn't know about any of this. So if David knew about it and wasn't saying anything, then we've got a real problem. That either means he's agreeing or he's not interested in fighting. But David's totally unaware of all of this. So what that means is if we make a big push, maybe something good could come of this. Maybe it'll be okay. Make sense to everybody?
Yep.
And the Radak says that the reason he says David doesn't know is because he's eminently confident that if David would know, David would have objected. Because David was told by Nasan the prophet that Shlomo was supposed to be the next king. So Nasan is saying we got a huge problem on our hands, but the one thing that we've got going for us is clearly David's unaware. Which means if we make David aware, maybe we can change this calculus. Nancy?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. No, I was just saying yes.
Okay, verse 12. V'ata l'chi iotzech na etza. So now Nasan says to Bathsheba, I would like to give you advice. Umaltias nafshech, and save yourself. V'yas nefesh b'nei Shlomo. You need to save yourself, and you need to save Shlomo. What does this mean, save yourself? So the Radak says a very straightforward thing. If Adoniyahu becomes the king, would he want to have Shlomo around?
Yeah.
Would he want to have Bathsheba around? These people sitting in the corner who know that Shlomo's supposed to be the king, you're going to die if Adoniyahu becomes the king. He's going to look at you as rebels. So save yourselves. This is even more than getting the kingdom. This is like saving your life. The other possibility, says the Radak, is maybe he doesn't feel their lives are at stake. Maybe he just feels you're going to become servants to him. Again, he clearly is going to want to create a situation where you're evidently subservient to him. Okay. It's interesting. Rashi says what it means, save yourself, is save yourself from dispute. In other words, Shlomo is going to want to serve as king because this is clearly the will of God. Not that Shlomo's going to want to serve as king because it's a great career opportunity. Shlomo's going to want to serve as king because rightfully so, he'll see it as his mission. And Adonio isn't going to want to cede that. So you're going to have a terrible dispute, a terrible fight, unless you work something out, unless you beat Adonio at the pass, cut him off at the pass. And the only way you could do that is with the help of David. So you got to do something. Verse 13. L'chi uvoi el melech David. Come to the King David. V'yamartoi love. And you should say to him, Hello, ato Adoni HaMelech. You, my master, the king. Nishbata lamos chalemur. You have sworn to your maidservant, saying, Ki Shlomo v'nei chimloch acharai. Shlomo, your son, will rule after me. V'hu yeshev al kisi. And he will sit on my throne. Umadua malach Adonio. And why has Adonio taken the reins of kingdom? You told me that my son was supposed to be the king. What's going on? So Nasan says to Bathsheba, you go in and you say that to David. Verse 14. While you're there speaking with the king, I'll come in after you. And I will fill in your words. In other words, we're going to create a scene here. David is going to come in, Bathsheba is going to come into David and say, what's going on? And as you're talking to him, I'll come in and I'll jump into this conversation as well. Verse 15, Vatavo Bathsheba al Melech Achadra. Bathsheba came into the king in the room. Vamelech Zakein Ma'od. The king was very weak, says the Radak. Va'avishag Hashunamis Misharas es Hamelech. And Avishag was serving the king, which you could imagine meant that it was not open door policy to the king's room. But it was different for Bathsheba. Bathsheba is his wife. And Bathsheba has something important to discuss. So she comes right in. Verse 16. Vatikod Bathsheba vatishtachu lamelech. And Bathsheba bowed to the king. Vayomer hamelech malach. And the king said to her, what is to you? What do you want? The Radak says it was obvious to him that she has an important thing to discuss. So what's on your mind? Verse 17. Vatomer lo. She said to him, Adoni, my master. Atonishbata b'Hashem Elokecha la'amosecha. You have sworn by Hashem, your God, to your maidservant, Ki Shlomo v'nei chimloch acharoi. That Shlomo, your son, will rule after me, V'hu yeshev al kisi, and that he will sit on your throne. Verse 18. V'ata hinei Adoniah malach. And now, behold, Adoniah is acting as the king. And the Radak says, she says to him, don't you see that Adoniah is rebelling against you? Because he's not only saying, remember, according to the Malbim, he was presenting himself as, I'm going to be the next king. But she says to him, he's already holding himself as the king. It's more than he's saying he's taking away my son's reign. He's rebelling against you. V'ata Adoni HaMelech lo yadata. You didn't know about this. So if you didn't know about this, what does that tell you? Surely if he thinks that you want him to be king, he would have discussed it with you. He didn't come to talk to you about it. What do you think that means? What that means is he intuitively understands that you don't want him to be the king, and he's acting like he's supposed to be the king. So he's rebelling against you. He's rebelling against you, and if you don't stand up, it's going to be a violation of your oath to me. Verse 19. Vayizbach shur umri v'tzon larov. And he made a whole event. He made a whole gala affair. Vayikra l'chol bnei hamelech. And he called all the members of the royal retinue, all his brothers, Ulev Yasar HaKohen, Ulioav Sarat Tzava. He brought in Evyasa the Kohen. He brought in Yoav the general. Shlomo Avdecha Lo Kara. He didn't call Shlomo your servant. The Malbim says, I'm sure intuitively we would agree with this. The Malbim says, she's saying to him, why do you think he made a big party? Isn't it obvious that he makes a big party to celebrate he's becoming king? And why do you think he didn't invite Shlomo? Did you notice he invited, I'm a little sensitive about the topic of invitations right now, an invitation list, but he invited everybody. He invited all of his brothers, the Chol Bnei HaMelech, except, shockingly, one person didn't make the list. Shlomo, didn't make the list. Why not? Isn't it obvious why not? That this party is about declaring himself to be the king. It's an interesting observation, Elaine. I suppose you mean that sort of like the organized presentation of the queen coming into the king and making an objection. I suppose what you mean. It does sound a little bit like Queen Esther. The thoughtfulness behind it. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that connection. Verse 20. Great pasuk. V'yato Adoni HaMelech einei chol Yisrael alecha. Now you, my master the king, everybody's looking at you. La'agid lahem, to tell the people, mi yeshev al kisei Adoni HaMelech acharav. Are you going to clarify who is going to succeed you? They're all looking to you. Now, the Malbim makes a really, really interesting comment. Because if you look back, let me just find the pasuk. Look back at verse 9 for a second, where it describes what actually happened. Adoniyo slaughtered all these animals, and he called all his brothers and all the people of Yehuda that served the king. That's what actually happened in verse 9. If you look at verse 19, in Bathsheba's account, as she's talking to David, she says he called all of his brothers and of Yasser and Yoav. And she leaves out the prominent people of Yehuda. Everybody with me? So the Malbim says there's a very thought out reason why she's doing this. She wants him to understand that he has an important role here, but she doesn't want him to think it's going to be a losing battle. Nobody in public office is ever interested in fighting a losing battle, right? You got to pick your battles. Everybody knows that, right? So she says to him, they're all looking to you. They're not all looking to him. A significant segment of higher ranking people in his tribe have already decided that Adoniyo is going to be the king. Now, they don't necessarily mean that as a rebellion against David. They might be misled by this whole thing. But she doesn't even want to tell him that, because he might think that they're all rebelling against him, and maybe they won't even care what he says. As people mentioned earlier this evening, he's been down that road already, of a king deciding of a son deciding he's going to rule during David's active period, and the people just siding with the son. So she doesn't want him to even know that. So she just presents it as it's a family issue, and he brought in two prominent people. And now, so she says to him, everybody's looking to you. They just need to hear from the king what's supposed to be. Now she's right. Once they hear from the king what's supposed to be, they are going to stand down. But she doesn't want him to be skeptical of that. It's a very interesting perspective from the Malbim. Verse 21. And it will be that when my master the king lies down with his fathers, and I and my son Shlomo will be sinners. What does that mean? That will be sinners. So Radak has some different ideas. One is it's just a way of saying we'll be pushed out of the kingdom. We'll be on the outs. So it's just sinners is a way of saying like we'll be like persona non grata. That's one possibility. Another possibility is that it will be said, why should Shlomo be the king? His mother's whole relationship with David was sinful in the first place. That's a second pshat. In other words, that people will discount us because of the beginning of the relationship between David and Bathsheba. That's another pshat. Third pshat the Radak says is actually she's not saying that Shlomo and she will be sinners. What she's saying euphemistically is that David will have sinned because he promised her that his son will rule, that her son will rule, and now he's not backing down that promise. But she doesn't want to say to the king, you will have sinned. So she says, we will have sinned. But that's what she's saying. And Rashi says something, maybe some of you have even heard me quote this Rashi before, because I think it's fascinating. Rashi says the meaning of the word hate is not sinner, not in this context. The meaning of the word hate is to be lacking. And she's saying to him, we will be missing out on the kingdom. But what that means is that whenever we talk about a hate, what it means to be a hate is it's a void, it's a lacking. When we talk about sins that we commit, yes, there could be punishments. Yes, we need to do tshuva and whatever it is. But maybe the greatest thing is our souls are lacking because we came up short for ourselves. It's interesting to think about. Okay. So that's what she says to David. You've got to help us. Verse 22. As this is going on, she's still speaking to the king. V'nasan hanavi ba. And Nasan, the prophet, came in. So like they're in the middle of having this really important conversation, and all of a sudden Nasan shows up. Remember, Nasan was the one who told Bathsheba to go in, verse 23. Vayagidu lo melech lemor, they told the king, Hinei Nasan hanavi, here is Nasan. Vayavol lefnei hamelech, came before the king. Vayishtachu lamelech alapav arza, and he bowed down on his face to the king. Verse 24, Vayomer Nasan, and Nasan said, Adoni HaMelech, my master the king, Ato Marta Adonio Yimloch Acharoi, did you say, this is how the Radak explains it, did you say that Adonio should succeed you? Who Yeshev al Kisi? And he should succeed, that he should be my successor. Did you say that? Because, gosh, why in the world would Adonio be making a party if not that you told him he's supposed to be the king? The Malbim says that Nasan is intentionally taking a different angle than Bathsheba. Bathsheba comes in and says, there's no way that Adonio spoke to you. So you understand, he's rebelling against you. Do something about it. Nasan, like any good intervention, people take different angles, right? They plan it out ahead of time, they take different angles. Nasan, so Elaine, this is an interesting distinction between this and Esther. Esther, she was all on her own in terms of the presentation. Nasan comes in and he takes a different angle than Bathsheba, and they planned this. Bathsheba says, I know you didn't tell Adonio he's going to rule, so what's going on? What are you going to do about it? Nassan says, I am confused. Did you tell Adoniyahu he was supposed to be the king? We've discussed this before. He's not supposed to be the king. Verse 25. He went down today to that spot. He made slaughtered all these animals. And he called to all the sons of the king and the officers and of Yasar. They're eating and drinking before him. And they said, Yichi Hamelech Adoniyahu. May the king Adoniyahu live. They called him the king. Is that on your say-so? Verse 26. Li ani avdecha uletzadok hakohen v'livnayo ben Yoyada v'lishlomo avdecha lo kara. I didn't make the invite list. I'm surprised. And Tzadok didn't. And Bnayo didn't. Your loyal followers didn't. And Shlomo didn't. Verse 27. If this is from you, if this is on your say-so, and you decided not to tell your servant, me, who should rule after you, is that what's going on here? I'm just surprised. So Nassan is kind of playing dumb, like confused. So Bathsheba comes and says, I know exactly what's going on. You got to stop it. Nassan takes a different tack, just confused, and taking as a given that none of this would have happened had David not said so. Which, when you think about it, that presentation reinforces the environment that David's word makes a difference. That David's word makes a difference. It's a fascinating 1-2 punch. She comes in being very emphatic, telling him he's got to do something. And in the middle, Nassan comes in, giving the appearance, by the way, that this is just coincidental. Nassan comes in and he says, whatever you say goes. So obviously Adoniyahu spoke to you about this. There's no way he would have done this without you. Why didn't you tell me about it? And this combination, they hope, is going to inspire David to stand up and be forceful when he's a person of such little strength at this point. Interesting insight, Debbie. Why does he refer in verse 26? Why does he refer to Shlomo, the servant? Okay. That's okay. And not the son of David. My guess is that he's implying that Shlomo is a very loyal follower of David, and that if the will of David was that Adoniyahu should succeed him, Shlomo would accept that. So actually he's saying, I don't understand why he's not inviting people if he spoke to you about all this. Because I'm sure he spoke to you about this. So why isn't he inviting me? Why didn't he invite me? I think that's what's going on. So I think the language of Avdecha is if there's one son who's not going to get involved with intrigue and not subvert you, obviously there's a lot of subliminal messaging here, because the implication is Shlomo wouldn't cross you, but even though he's saying, I'm sure Adoniyahu wouldn't cross you, he knows Adoniyahu has crossed David. So presumably he's building up the idea that some sons you can trust and some sons you can't. So that's what I think. I could be wrong, but thank you for making that point. Okay, so we will see next time, God willing, what David's response is going to be. But they have really planned this out, and their hope is that they will arouse action from the current king of Israel. Okay, very nice to meet again. I want to wish everyone a good night, and we should just share a lot of good news. Okay,
Thank you, Rabbi.